The sun had barely risen over the historic gates of the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, casting long golden rays across the parade grounds. Freshly scrubbed, immaculately uniformed cadets marched in rigid formation, their polished shoes clicking in precise rhythm against the concrete. The air was thick with anticipation, whispers, and the faint smell of salt from the nearby Chesapeake Bay. It was another ordinary morning in a place where discipline wasn't just taught, it was ingrained into every fiber of a young officer in training. Among the cadets, a small group of sophomores gathered near the side of the parade field, their chatter casual but edged with mischief. At the center of their attention was Jason McCall, loud, brash, and the unofficial ringleader of any prank that could assert his dominance over newer cadets. With a cocky grin, he nudged the boy beside him, whispering, "Watch this. Bet she's just some janitor, or worse, a civilian, snooping around." Then she appeared. No one paid her much attention at first. She walked with a quiet, almost serene grace, her plain clothes stark against the backdrop of disciplined military attire. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that scanned the grounds with a calm precision. She moved with confidence, yet without arrogance, as if she belonged to every part of the academy without needing anyone's approval. Jason's group snickered. "Look at her," one muttered. "She doesn't even look like she knows which end of a broom to hold." A few cadets elbowed each other, barely containing their laughter. Jason, fueled by bravado, made a bold move. He spat near her polished shoes, a crude gesture of disrespect meant to mark his territory. "That's for thinking you can walk among us," he muttered under his breath. His friends erupted into laughter, the sound echoing across the quiet morning air. She didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved in her face. She simply looked down at the ground, observing the spittle, then slowly lifted her gaze to each cadet's face, memorizing them, her eyes unflinching, piercing. There was a weight in her gaze, a silent warning that made even the boldest in the group shiver ever so slightly. The cadets, emboldened by their ignorance, continued their mockery, leaning in close, pointing, whispering cruel jokes under their breath. Jason's laughter was loudest of all. He didn't notice the subtle tilt of her head, the faint tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes seemed to catalog every name, every face, every act of insolence. Finally, without a word, she turned and walked away. Her footsteps were steady, measured, and purposeful. Each step carried authority, an authority they didn't yet recognize. The cadets stared after her, confused at the absence of fear, anger, or even acknowledgement of their defiance. Later, in the barracks, the cadets relived the encounter with exaggerated bravado. Jason replayed the moment, boasting to anyone who would listen. She didn't even say a word. Can you believe it? Not a single thing. Totally ignored us. Like we didn't exist. His friends nodded, laughing, though Evan Ortiz, Jason's roommate, felt a tight knot of unease in his stomach. He couldn't shake the impression of her eyes calm, patient, and somehow far too intelligent for a civilian. She was. Weird, Evan muttered quietly, almost to himself. Too steady. Like she knew more than she let on. Jason scoffed. "Oh, come on. She's nothing. Probably just some visitor or a staff member. Chill out, man. You're thinking too much." But Evan couldn't dismiss it. There was something in the way she carried herself, an unspoken command of the room, even without the uniform. It was unsettling, almost magnetic. Meanwhile, across the grounds, in a small, nondescript office, the woman walked briskly, her plain attire replaced by an immaculate Navy uniform, the insignia of a rear admiral gleaming on her chest. Every medal, every ribbon told a story of battles fought, lives saved, and commands earned through courage and unyielding discipline. Her name was Rear Admiral Rebecca Becky Monroe, a decorated veteran known to few by sight, but whose reputation echoed across the Navy. She had come to the Academy on a unique mission: to observe, assess, and evaluate the leadership potential of the incoming class of cadets, many of whom had yet to learn the difference between authority and arrogance. Her approach was unorthodox, walking among them, unseen, observing their reactions to the unfamiliar, testing their character in ways that could not be taught in classrooms or textbooks. Today, however, her patience had already been tested. She had walked through the parade grounds disguised as a civilian to gauge reactions to authority, figures who were unrecognized or underestimated. And she had received the answer she needed, one that chilled her despite her experience. The cadets who spat, laughed, and mocked represented arrogance unchecked, pride untempered, and a lack of fundamental respect that could, in the future, endanger not just themselves, but the men and women they would one day lead. She made her notes quietly, her pen gliding across the pad with precision. Each jot was meticulous, each observation detailed. She would remember every name. Every act of disrespect was catalogued not with anger, but with the cold efficiency of someone who understood the weight of command. As the morning progressed, the cadets remained oblivious to her real identity, joking and teasing each other, unaware that the moment they had deemed insignificant would become a defining point in their lives. The brass announcement over the loudspeakers would soon change everything. And when it did, every mocking smirk, every careless word, and every act of arrogance would come crashing down on them in a way they could not have imagined. For now, she walked among the cadets, a silent observer, and waited. The sun climbed higher, glinting off the polished brass of her insignia, signaling that the time for lessons was drawing near. One thing was certain: respect was about to be taught in a way no classroom ever could. The evening descended upon Annapolis like a quiet exhale. The sun dipped behind the Chesapeake Bay, casting a golden-orange glow across the Academy's sprawling grounds. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere was a blend of laughter, whispered speculation, and the faint nervous energy that always lingered in places where discipline and youth collided. Cadets leaned on their bunks, swapping stories of the day's exercises and minor pranks. Yet one encounter refused to leave Jason McCall's mind. "Did you see her?" "She didn't even flinch," Jason bragged, tossing his jacket onto the bunk. "I swear, she's either crazy calm or completely unhinged. Either way, hilarious." Evan Ortiz, however, couldn't join in the laughter. He sat on the edge of his bed, eyes fixed on the wall, the image of the woman's unwavering gaze still etched into his memory. Something about her had unsettled him. Not fear exactly, but a quiet, insistent awareness that she wasn't just another civilian. Her presence carried authority, a silent weight that demanded acknowledgement without a single word. She wasn't normal, Evan said softly, almost as if confessing a secret. "I mean, she looked at us, Jason. She saw us. Like she could read what we were thinking." Jason waved him off. "You're overthinking this, man. She's nothing. Probably some visiting civilian or administrative staff. Chill. Forget about her." But Evan couldn't. That piercing, quiet authority clung to him, gnawing at his pride. There was something more at play, something he wasn't supposed to notice, yet couldn't ignore. As night deepened, the barracks quieted. Cadets retreated. To their bunks, some reading manuals, others scrolling through their phones, while a few simply stared at the ceiling, replaying moments of the day. And then, over the intercom, a voice rang out clear, commanding and formal. "Attention, all cadets. The commanding officer for the upcoming leadership evaluation will arrive tomorrow morning. All cadets will assemble in full uniform at 07:00 hours." A ripple of excitement passed through the room. Some cadets shrugged it off. Others whispered about the possibility of a high-ranking officer inspecting their performance. Jason's grin widened. "Ha! Bet it's some old rear admiral or retired officer checking on us." Nothing to worry about, but Evan's stomach tightened. He felt a cold knot of apprehension forming, a sensation that grew stronger with each passing second. There was something familiar, though he couldn't yet place it. The calm, meticulous composure he had noticed earlier, the way she seemed to catalog everything, was unlike any visitor he had ever encountered. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that only a fall morning in Maryland could bring. Mist hovered over the parade grounds, swirling in the early sunlight. Cadets lined up in perfect formation, their white hats gleaming, their faces a mixture of nerves and bravado. Jason nudged Evan, whispering, "Watch, this is going to be boring. Probably just a desk jockey with medals." Then the announcement came. A voice over the loudspeakers boomed, "Attention all cadets. Please welcome Rear Admiral Rebecca Monroe, commanding officer for this year's leadership evaluation." The words cut through the crisp air like a blade. Confusion and murmurs spread through the ranks. The cadets turned, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the officer. And then she stepped forward. It was her, the same woman they had mocked the day before, now in full uniform, medals gleaming in the morning sun. Her presence was immediately magnetic. Even the most arrogant cadets felt their bravado falter under her gaze. Jason's mouth went dry. The smirk he had worn so confidently the previous day vanished. She walked slowly across the parade ground, her eyes scanning each line of cadets, measuring, observing, silently noting behavior. Every polished shoe, every stiff posture, every nervous glance was catalogued with precision. There was no shouting, no scolding, no dramatics, just an aura of authority so potent it demanded attention. Finally, she stopped in front of Jason's line. Her gaze fell upon him, steady, unyielding. He felt a shiver run down his spine. For the first time in his life, someone saw him not the facade he presented, not the bravado he wielded as armor, but the arrogance beneath it. "Cadets," she said, her voice calm, but carrying over the field like a taut wire of steel, "leadership is more than command. It begins with humility. It begins with understanding the weight of your actions, even before anyone gives you a rank. Today, you will begin to learn what it truly means to lead." No one spoke. The words, though gentle, carried an invisible force. Jason tried to straighten, tried to act unimpressed, but his hands trembled slightly. Evan felt his jaw tighten, a sense of realization dawning over him. The woman they had spat near, the one they thought was beneath them, was the person responsible for evaluating their very futures. In that moment, the parade ground shifted. The cadets' confidence faltered. Mockery, arrogance, and careless jokes evaporated into the crisp air, replaced by something far more potent: fear tempered with respect, anxiety mixed with awe. Every cadet, even the loudest troublemaker, felt the undeniable presence of someone who had earned the right to command, not through threats, not through yelling, but through decades of experience, discipline, and unwavering composure. As she continued down the lines, her boots clicking against the parade ground, she paused briefly, her eyes locking with Jason's once more. The silence was deafening. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. The reality of what they had done yesterday, the disrespect, the arrogance, hit him like a wave. By the time she reached the end of the line, the cadets were no longer joking. They stood rigid, their eyes straight ahead, faces pale. Even the most defiant among them felt the weight of her presence, the subtle, unspoken command of authority that couldn't be ignored. Admiral Monroe finally spoke again, softer this time, but with equal weight. "Tomorrow begins your evaluation. Consider today your introduction, not to me, but to yourselves. Learn what it means to lead, to follow, and to respect the chain of command, both visible and unseen. Your actions will have consequences. Your character will define your future. She turned sharply and walked away, leaving a silence that lingered longer than any shouted command ever could. Jason exhaled, shakily, as if the air itself had been sucked out of him. He glanced at Evan, who simply nodded, the weight of understanding settling over both of them. That night, the cadets could barely sleep. They replayed the parade ground, her calm, unwavering eyes, and the authority she carried without raising her voice. Jason realized, with a knot in his stomach, that the lessons of the day had only just begun. Humiliation, fear, awe, and respect were all tangled together in a knot he didn't yet understand. But by morning, the first test of true leadership awaited, and they would discover, painfully, that the woman they had mocked yesterday wasn't just a visitor or staff member. She was the Rear Admiral herself, and the journey to earn her respect had already begun. The dawn broke over Annapolis with a muted gray sky, the morning mist still clinging stubbornly to the parade grounds. The cadets assembled in formation, their crisp uniforms stark against the damp earth. Polished shoes glinted as they shifted nervously from foot to foot. Even the seasoned sophomores felt a whisper of unease. Today wasn't just another inspection. Today was the beginning of a test that would stretch their pride, patience, and sense of self far beyond anything they had experienced. Admiral Rebecca Monroe strode onto the field, her presence commanding without effort. The medals on her chest caught the dim sunlight, glinting like distant stars. But it wasn't the decorations that held the cadets' attention. It was the intensity of her gaze. She stopped in front of Jason's line, eyes scanning every cadet, noting posture, expression, and subtle gestures. Her silence was heavier than any shouted command. It pressed on their minds, demanding attention. "Today," she began, her voice calm but firm, "you will begin Operation Sea Mirror. This exercise will test your ability to lead, to make decisions under pressure, and to understand the consequences of your actions. It will also reveal what you value most, your ego or the lives of those you are responsible for." The cadets shifted uneasily. Jason's bravado wavered slightly, though he tried to mask it with a smirk. He glanced at Evan, who simply nodded grimly. Evan's unease mirrored Jason's inner conflict, a mix of nervous anticipation and a creeping recognition that their arrogance had not prepared them for this moment. Admiral Monroe continued, "You will be divided into teams. Each team will manage a simulated humanitarian rescue. Resources are limited. Communication is constrained. Your decisions will directly affect the outcome. Remember, leadership is not about orders. Leadership is about responsibility. Fail in understanding this, and your team fails. Fail in understanding yourself, and your career may never recover." The teams were assembled, and cadets scrambled to assert themselves. Jason immediately tried to take command, barking orders without listening to input from quieter members. "Move the supplies over there. Check the perimeter." His voice carried authority, but it was the authority of arrogance, not experience. Evan attempted to interject, suggesting a more coordinated approach. "If we split the team strategically, we can cover more ground and help the injured faster." Jason snapped, "We don't have time for your ideas, Ortiz. Just follow orders." Admiral Monroe observed quietly, standing at the periphery like a shadow of judgment. She took notes meticulously, her pen gliding over her pad, cataloging every misstep, every arrogance-driven decision. She said nothing yet. She didn't need to. The cadets were already revealing their weaknesses without her intervention. As the exercise progressed, chaos unfolded quickly. Cadets miscommunicated, ignored critical instructions, and prioritized personal glory over the mission. Jason's group stumbled over logistics, wasting precious time while arguing over trivialities. Cadets outside their team yelled across the field, trying to intervene, but their suggestions were drowned out by Jason's shouting. Amidst the growing disorder, a simulation casualty cried out a role player who acted injured, calling for immediate aid. Jason barked orders without considering strategy or care, sending some cadets to one side while leaving the rest unprepared. Evan, desperate to salvage the situation, tried to coordinate quietly, but Jason dismissed him with irritation. Then Admiral Monroe spoke softly, measured, but cutting through the chaos. Jason McCall, Ortiz, stepped forward. The two cadets froze, mid-action. Her eyes bore into them, unblinking. "Do you hear the cries around you?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Do you hear the voices of those who depend on your decisions? Leadership is not about being the loudest. Leadership is about being the wisest when everyone else is panicking. Look at your team. Are they safe? Are they organized? Or are you blinded by pride?" Jason's face reddened. His fists clenched, and he opened his mouth to argue, but words failed him. Evan felt the same tension twist in his chest, a mixture of fear and revelation. For the first time, they realized that leadership was not a matter of dominating others. It was a responsibility that could not be shirked, even by the strongest or loudest cadet. Admiral Monroe continued, walking among the other teams, making subtle adjustments, giving guidance without ever shouting or belittling. Her presence was magnetic. Cadets began to mimic her calm composure, realizing that control came not from volume, but from observation, listening, and careful decision-making. The simulation intensified. Communication lines were suddenly cut, and supplies were scarce. Cadets panicked, arguing over the allocation of limited resources. One role player, simulating a civilian, screamed for help, adding to the stress. Jason barked orders again, but the chaos continued. Then she asked a single question, directed at Jason, which cut deeper than any scolding could. "If you do not hear the weakest voice, how can you protect the strongest lives?" Jason faltered. His ego battled with the dawning understanding of failure. He realized that in trying to assert dominance, he had neglected not only his team's cohesion, but also their effectiveness. Every misstep, every ignored suggestion, now weighed on him. Evan, quietly taking charge where Jason faltered, coordinated medics and supply distribution, ensuring simulated casualties received care. Slowly, the chaos began to ebb. The contrast between Jason's arrogance and Evan's calm, considered approach became painfully clear. Admiral Monroe observed everything silently. She never raised her voice. She never threatened. But her presence, her authority, and her ability to extract lessons from failure created a pressure far greater than any shouted command. She watched. As Jason's pride faltered, replaced by a growing, uncomfortable awareness that leadership demanded humility, foresight, and empathy. By the end of the exercise, no team had achieved perfect results. Every cadet had made mistakes. But the lessons were undeniable. Arrogance was a liability, listening was essential, and leadership was not a title, it was action. Jason stood off to the side, drenched in sweat, mud, and shame. His uniform was muddied, his hands scraped, and his face pale. He looked at Admiral Monroe, who finally approached him. "Today was not about winning," she said softly, her voice calm yet commanding. "It was about understanding your failures. Tomorrow we will begin again, and you will remember this. Pride without insight will always precede disaster." For Evan, a spark of understanding ignited. He had learned something essential, not just about leadership, but about character, about the way those in power must balance authority with empathy. As the cadets returned to their barracks that evening, Jason could barely speak. The words he would have used to boast or joke caught in his throat. He had been confronted with a truth he could not escape. He had disrespected a woman who had earned her rank, earned her medals, and earned the authority that now hung over him like an unspoken judgment. Evan, quiet and thoughtful, simply nodded to himself. They had only begun to learn, and the road ahead would be harder, longer, and more humbling than any of them had imagined. But for the first time, Jason felt something he had never truly known. Respect for someone he had once considered beneath him. And somewhere in the shadows, Admiral Monroe watched, her expression unreadable. She knew the seeds of transformation had been planted. Tomorrow, they would be tested again, and she would push them further until arrogance was stripped away and true leadership emerged from the ashes of their pride. The sky was overcast that morning, heavy clouds casting a dull gray light over the parade grounds. A cold wind swept in from the Chesapeake Bay, tugging at uniforms and whipping hair across tense faces. The cadets were assembled again, a palpable sense of anticipation mixed with apprehension hanging in the air. Today, the stakes would rise. Admiral Monroe had made it clear the previous day. Leadership was about more than pride. It was measured in decisions, in foresight, and in responsibility for others. Jason McCall adjusted his cap nervously, trying to maintain the swagger that had always defined him. His uniform, still damp and streaked with mud from yesterday's exercise, clung uncomfortably to his shoulders. He glanced at Evan Ortiz, whose calm, focused expression contrasted sharply with Jason's fraying confidence. Something about Monroe's silent scrutiny had unsettled him more than any shouted reprimand ever could. Admiral Monroe appeared on the field, her presence immediate, commanding, yet without theatrics. The medals on her chest glinted faintly under the muted light, a subtle reminder of decades of experience and authority earned in the crucible of real command. She surveyed the cadets with quiet intensity, her eyes lingering on Jason's line, noting posture, demeanor, and subtle micro-expressions. "Today," she said, her voice steady and deliberate, Operation Sea Mirror continues. The scenario has evolved. Resources are now limited, communications are compromised, and simulated casualties will escalate unpredictably. Every decision you make, every command you issue, will have consequences. Failure to account for your team's needs is failure of leadership itself. Are you ready? The cadets shifted, the weight of her words sinking in. Jason tried to mask his unease with bravado, but his fingers trembled slightly as he gripped his clipboard. Evan, silently observing, knew that arrogance alone would not carry them through this trial. The exercise began. Teams scattered to designated zones, each tasked with coordinating rescue operations under pressure. Communication lines already limited were further restricted, forcing cadets to adapt and innovate on the fly. Supplies were scarce, and simulated civilian casualties began to appear across the field, crying for attention, medical aid, and guidance. Jason immediately took charge, barking orders at his team with increasing frustration. Move faster. Check the east perimeter. We can't waste time. His voice was loud, commanding, but increasingly frantic. Evan attempted to redirect him, suggesting strategic allocation of resources. Jason, we need to prioritize the wounded. Split teams and secure the perimeter afterward. Evan urged. Jason snapped, his pride erupting. No, I said now. Follow my orders, Ortiz, or step aside. The chaos escalated. Cadets mismanaged supplies, left simulated casualties unattended, and failed to communicate effectively. A role player portraying a civilian screamed for help as another injured cadet called for medical attention. Jason barked again, attempting to assert control, but the results were disastrous. His frustration blinded him to the consequences of his decisions. Admiral Monroe observed silently from the periphery. Her pen glided across her pad, noting every mistake, every moment of arrogance, and every failure to listen. She allowed the chaos to unfold, giving no interference, forcing the cadets to confront the consequences of their choices themselves. At one point, the exercise escalated further. A sudden communication failure, simulated by instructors, cut off Jason's team from outside coordination. Supplies became critically limited, forcing difficult decisions about prioritizing casualties. The simulated civilians screamed, some injured, beyond the capacity of a single team to assist. Jason's frustration boiled over. "This is impossible," he shouted, slamming a hand against a crate. "Why aren't you listening? Move faster." Evan stepped forward, calm but firm. "Jason, yelling won't fix this. We need to work together. Coordinate, don't just order." Jason whirled on him, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't know what it's like to be in charge. You don't know how it feels to carry responsibility on your shoulders." Admiral Monroe finally intervened, her voice cutting through the chaos with measured authority. "McCall, Ortiz, stop. Look at your team. Look at the people depending on you. This is not about being the loudest or the first to act. This is about seeing, hearing, and understanding every voice around you." Jason froze, his anger faltering. Her calm, unflinching gaze pinned him in place. The weight of her words sank in. For the first time, he realized that he had failed, not merely in executing the exercise, but in failing to fulfill his responsibility to those depending on him. Pride, arrogance, and ego had blinded him to the needs of his team. She walked closer, approaching Jason with deliberate composure. "I buried sailors," she said quietly, almost to herself but loud enough for him to hear, because their leaders refused to listen. Because they thought shouting and intimidation was leadership. Silence fell. The wind carried her words across the field, reaching even the most distant cadets. Jason's face went pale. Evan's jaw tightened, his earlier apprehension solidifying into clarity. This wasn't a simulation anymore. It was a lesson in life and death, played out in miniature, and Jason had been forced to confront his failures directly. Gradually, the chaos began to subside. Evan took charge quietly, coordinating teams, directing attention to the most critical casualties, and prioritizing supplies effectively. Slowly, Jason followed, still uneasy, but recognizing the necessity of listening rather than dominating. The team began to function, albeit imperfectly. Mistakes were made, but they were mitigated by collaboration rather than crushed by hubris. Throughout the exercise, Admiral Monroe observed every interaction, every decision, and every lapse. She made no public pronouncements, allowing the cadets to feel the consequences of their errors firsthand. Her method was subtle, indirect, but devastatingly effective. Pride had been challenged, ego had been humbled, and lessons had been burned into their memory far more effectively than any lecture ever could. As the exercise concluded, the cadets regrouped on the parade ground, exhausted, muddy, and bruised, both physically and emotionally. Jason's hands shook as he straightened, struggling to regain composure. Evan, tired but resolute, looked to Admiral Monroe, who finally approached the group. "Today was not about winning," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying undeniable weight. "It was about understanding your failures, recognizing where your pride interferes with responsibility, and seeing the consequences of ignoring those you lead. Remember this: arrogance can destroy even the strongest unit. Listening, humility, and foresight are the true marks of leadership." Jason lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Shame mixed with revelation, a cocktail more potent than any exhaustion or physical strain. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lead, not to dominate, not to assert, but to protect, guide, and value every person under his command. Evan, standing quietly beside him, absorbed the lesson differently. He had witnessed both failure and redemption within their small team. He understood that leadership wasn't about ego, it was about service. As the cadets trudged back to the barracks, mud-caked and weary, a profound silence settled over the group. They had survived the trial, but the impact of Admiral Monroe's presence, her observation, and her subtle yet piercing lessons lingered. The day had stripped away arrogance, exposed weakness, and planted the seeds of growth. Jason glanced at Evan once more. I get it now, he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. I screwed up. Big time. Evan nodded. It's not over. But maybe we've started to learn. Somewhere in the shadows, Admiral Monroe watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. She knew that true transformation took time. Pride, once rooted, could not be eradicated in a single exercise. But today had been necessary. Tomorrow, the challenges would increase. The lessons would deepen. And the cadets who had mocked her yesterday would begin to understand what it meant to earn respect, not just from her, but from themselves. The morning fog clung thickly to the parade grounds, muted sunlight casting long gray shadows over the cadets as they assembled. Today's exercise promised to be even more intense. Admiral Rebecca Monroe had warned them the previous day that leadership was tested not only in routine drills, but when chaos threatened to overwhelm. The young cadets, many of whom had bristled under her quiet authority, were about to experience their first real taste of pressure that could break more than their confidence. It could shatter their ego. Jason McCall stood with his usual swagger, but the veneer of arrogance had begun to crack. Mud-streaked uniforms and the lingering shame of yesterday's failures had replaced some of his bravado with unease. He glanced at Evan Ortiz, whose calm, focused expression contrasted sharply with Jason's inner turmoil. Even the most confident among the cadets felt the weight of the day pressing on them. Admiral Monroe appeared on the field with her trademark quiet authority. She did not raise her voice or make grand gestures. Instead, she simply walked, and the cadets instinctively straightened, their eyes fixed on her as she surveyed the grounds. Her medals caught the weak sunlight, each one a silent testament to decades of service, courage, and lives saved in impossible circumstances. Today, she said, her voice carrying evenly across the field, Operation Sea Mirror will escalate. Communication failures, resource scarcity, and simulated casualties will increase dramatically. Your ability to remain calm, prioritize, and act with foresight will be tested. Mistakes will have consequences, both immediate and lasting. Pay attention. Learn. The cadets were divided into their teams and given updated mission parameters. Suddenly, the scenario shifted. Simulated communications were cut, and role players portraying injured civilians were scattered unpredictably across the field. Supplies were limited, and the team's coordination would be pushed to the breaking point. Jason immediately attempted to assert control, barking orders at his team. Move faster. Secure that perimeter. We can't waste time. His voice, once confident, now carried hints of panic. Evan, recognizing the deteriorating situation, tried to redirect him. Jason, focus on triaging the injured first. The perimeter is secondary. You're losing control, Evan urged. Jason snapped, frustration boiling over. I am in control. Just follow my orders. Admiral Monroe observed quietly, her eyes sharp, cataloging every misstep, every moment of misplaced pride. Her silence weighed heavier than any shouted command. It forced the cadets to confront the consequences of their actions directly. The simulation escalated further. Role players acting as civilians screamed for help, some injured beyond the capacity of the teams to assist efficiently. Jason's inability to delegate effectively caused delays, miscommunications, and frustration. The chaos became nearly tangible, threatening to overwhelm even the most prepared cadets. Monroe stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting through the clamor. "McCall, Ortiz, stop, step back." Jason froze. His chest heaved, sweat soaking through his uniform. "What now?" he muttered, barely audibly. "You were too focused on being in charge," Monroe said, her voice low but penetrating. "Leadership is not about asserting dominance. It's about seeing every person under your command, hearing their needs, understanding their limitations, and making choices that protect them, even when it is uncomfortable." Jason's mind raced. His pride battled with the creeping understanding of failure. For the first time, he realized that his loud orders, intended to demonstrate authority, had endangered the simulation's success and alienated those he was meant to lead. Evan, quietly taking initiative, organized triage, delegated supplies logically, and coordinated evacuation routes for simulated casualties. Slowly, the chaos began to subside, the team functioning, albeit imperfectly. The contrast between Jason's arrogance and Evan's calm, considered leadership, was undeniable. Later that evening, Admiral Monroe called the cadets together. The lights in the briefing room were dim, the atmosphere solemn. She played archival footage on a projector, and the cadets leaned forward instinctively. Grainy black and white footage flickered across the screen, showing a young officer moving through smoke and fire, pulling sailors from a burning shipwreck. Each motion was precise, fearless, and deliberate. Jason squinted, recognizing her immediately. It was Rebecca Monroe herself, decades earlier, leading a real-life rescue mission that had saved 47 lives. The room was silent, the only sound the crackle of the projector. Cadets stared at the screen in disbelief, realizing the magnitude of the woman they had once mocked. "She was there," Evan whispered, voice trembling. "She saved lives. All by herself." Monroe's voice broke the silence. "Respect is not given because of rank or uniform. It is earned through courage, sacrifice, and responsibility. Every decision you make affects lives. Every failure can be fatal. Today, some of you have glimpsed what it means to bear that weight." Jason's face went pale. Shame mixed with awe, creating a weight he had never felt before. The woman he had laughed at, spat near, and mocked was a decorated war hero who had risked everything for those under her command. The magnitude of her achievements and the quiet authority she now wielded overwhelmed him. For the first time, he felt the sting of genuine humility. Pride, arrogance, and bravado were no longer armor, they were liabilities. He glanced at Evan, whose calm composure now seemed rooted in understanding, empathy, and discipline. For the first time, Jason realized that leadership wasn't about being seen as strong. It was about being effective, measured, and responsible. Admiral Monroe continued, pacing slowly across the room, her gaze settling on Jason and his team. "Some of you will fail if you do not learn these lessons," she said quietly. "Some of you will carry arrogance into the field, and it will cost lives. Today, consider yourselves warned. Tomorrow, the stakes will rise. Your decisions will matter more than you know." The cadets left the room that evening in stunned silence. Jason walked slowly, head down, his thoughts a whirl of shame, awe, and tentative respect. Evan walked beside him, quietly confident, knowing that today had been a turning point, not just in the exercise, but in the cadets' understanding of what leadership truly required. As the sun set over the academy, Admiral Monroe stood alone on the empty parade grounds, looking toward the bay. She whispered softly to herself, a ritual remembrance of those she had led and those she had lost. "They are learning," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "It will take time, but they will learn." The young cadets, muddy, exhausted, and emotionally drained, now carried a new weight on their shoulders. Respect, responsibility, and humility were no longer abstract concepts. They were tangible, pressing, and unavoidable. And for Jason, the lesson was personal. The woman he had once mocked was no ordinary officer. She was a living legend, and the journey to earn her respect and his own sense of true leadership had only just begun. The morning sky had turned a bruised gray, heavy clouds swirling over the academy as if warning the cadets of the day ahead. A storm had rolled in overnight, leaving the parade grounds slick with mud, puddles forming in uneven patches, and a cold wind biting at the exposed skin of their faces. The atmosphere was tense, the air charged with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. Today's exercise would test not only their leadership and decision-making skills, but also their endurance and resilience under conditions that mirrored the unpredictability of real-life operations. Jason McCall stood at the edge of the parade ground, his uniform soaked, mud streaking his once pristine jacket. He shifted nervously, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his clipboard. The mistakes of previous exercises weighed heavily on him. He had been reckless, arrogant, and dismissive, but something had shifted within him after witnessing Admiral Monroe's quiet authority and the footage of her heroic past. Evan Ortiz, standing beside him, radiated calm and focus. His uniform was similarly soaked, but his posture and demeanor conveyed steady determination. The contrast between the two cadets was stark. Jason knew that if he wanted to regain his standing and lead effectively, he would need to learn from Evan, suppress his ego, and embrace humility. Admiral Monroe appeared on the field, emerging from the mist like a figure carved from resolve itself. Her boots splashed through the shallow puddles, each step deliberate, her metals catching fleeting glints of light as the storm clouds churned above. She did not shout, wave, or dramatize her presence. She simply walked among them, radiating authority, focus, and the quiet intensity of someone who had faced chaos, far more dangerous than a cadet exercise. "Today," she said, her voice calm yet piercing through the sound of the wind, Operation Sea Mirror will reach its final phase. The scenario has been escalated. Severe weather, resource shortages, and multiple simulated casualties will challenge your ability to act decisively, responsibly, and compassionately. Leadership is not demonstrated by dominance, but by action under pressure. Fail, and you will see firsthand the consequences of poor decision-making. The cadets were divided into teams, their previous exercises etched in their minds like scar tissue. Jason, humbled but still nervous, attempted to take command, but this time differently. He approached Evan and his teammates, taking a deep breath. "Listen," Jason said, voice low and steady. "We've messed up before, but we're going to fix it. We work together. We watch out for everyone. No one gets left behind." Evan raised an eyebrow, surprised by Jason's tone. For the first time, he heard humility, not arrogance. He nodded, agreed. "Let's coordinate, communicate, and prioritize. That's how we succeed." The exercise began. The rain intensified, soaking through uniforms and reducing visibility. Mud made footing treacherous, slowing movements and adding strain to every task. Role players portraying injured civilians called for assistance, some screaming, others fainting. The cadets' first test was navigating through the storm while maintaining awareness of both resources and personnel. Jason, now consciously listening, began to assign tasks according to individual strengths. He asked quieter cadets for their input, encouraged suggestions, and adjusted strategy based on real-time observations. When a teammate slipped in the mud, Jason immediately extended a hand, pulling them to safety. He barked no orders in anger. Every instruction was measured, thoughtful, and aimed at the collective success of the team. Evan silently monitored the operation, coordinating supplies, medical attention, and evacuation routes. Together, Jason and Evan created a synergy that their team had never experienced. The chaos of the storm remained relentless, but for the first time, the cadets were functioning as a cohesive unit. Admiral Monroe observed silently from the sidelines. She made no corrections, issued no overt instructions, and yet her presence was unmistakable. She noted Jason's transformation, the subtle shift from ego-driven commands to collaborative leadership. She observed Evan's continued calm efficiency, the foundation upon which the team now relied. Her pen moved across her notebook in precise strokes, cataloging the growth, the mistakes, and the moments of insight that would shape their future as officers. As the exercise progressed, another challenge emerged. A sudden surge of floodwater, simulated by instructors, cut off part of the team's access to essential supplies. Panic could have erupted, but Jason remained composed. Evan, reroute medics to the north sector. I'll stabilize the south. Communicate with the others and keep them coordinated, he said, voice firm but calm. Evan nodded, trusting Jason's judgment. Understood. We've got this. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, navigating the slippery terrain, rescuing role players, and redistributing resources efficiently. Mistakes were made, cadets slipped. Some supplies were delayed, but the emphasis was on adaptation, collaboration, and accountability rather than ego. Jason's presence was no longer domineering. It was supportive, constructive, and most importantly, responsible. By midday, the storm had peaked, winds whipping across the parade grounds and rain pelting every cadet with relentless force. Exhaustion set in, muscles screamed, and morale wavered. Jason, drenched and shivering, noticed one cadet faltering under pressure. He immediately rushed over, steadying the cadet and speaking quietly but firmly. Take a breath. We're here together. You're not alone. Let's keep moving. For the first time, the cadet looked at him with genuine trust. Jason felt an unfamiliar but profound sense of responsibility, not to assert dominance, but to protect and guide. Evan's nod confirmed that Jason was doing well. The partnership was working. Finally, after hours of relentless effort, the exercise concluded. The cadets, soaked, muddy, and exhausted, regrouped. They had survived the storm, saved every simulated casualty, and adapted to every obstacle. It was not perfection, but it was progress, the culmination of lessons learned, humility embraced, and leadership tested under conditions far harsher than any pride or ego could withstand. Admiral Monroe approached Jason and Evan, her gaze sweeping over the team. Today, you demonstrated growth, she said quietly. Jason McCall, you learned to lead without dominating. You learned to hear, observe, and act responsibly. That is the essence of leadership. Ortiz, your calm, quiet guidance helped create the foundation. Together, you transformed failure into success. Jason swallowed, feeling a mix of exhaustion, relief, and newfound respect. He realized that the lessons were not just about surviving a simulation. They were about understanding responsibility, empathy, and the true weight of command. Evan, though tired, allowed himself a small smile. The day had tested them in ways textbooks never could. The storm had revealed character, broken arrogance, and allowed teamwork to emerge where individual pride had once reigned. Later, as the cadets cleaned up, Jason approached Admiral Monroe privately. Ma'am, I understand now. I disrespected you before I even knew who you were. I'm sorry. Monroe regarded him silently for a long moment. Then, with a faint smile, she said, Respect is not about apologies. It's about learning and growing. Today, you demonstrated that. Keep building on it. As the storm clouds parted and the sun broke through, the cadets looked out over the parade grounds, exhausted but transformed. The lesson had been hard, but it had been real. Pride had been tempered. Arrogance had been replaced by accountability. Leadership was no longer an abstract concept. It was lived, felt, and earned through action. Jason glanced at Evan, who simply nodded, silently affirming the progress they had made together. And somewhere on the field, Admiral Monroe watched, satisfied that the seeds of true leadership had taken root, ready to grow stronger with each subsequent challenge. The morning air was crisp, almost electric, as cadets assembled on the parade grounds. The lessons of the past week hung over them like a heavy fog. The failures, the chaos, the moments of panic, and the slow, painstaking process of learning to lead with responsibility and humility. Each young officer in training carried a weight now, a recognition that leadership was not about dominance, but about awareness, accountability, and service to those under one's command. Jason McCall stood slightly apart from his team, mud still caked on his boots, hair plastered to his forehead from yesterday's storm. His uniform bore the wear and tear of multiple exercises, but more importantly, his face bore the expression of someone who had seen the consequences of arrogance firsthand. The smirk that had defined him was gone. In its place was a new awareness, a tentative humility and an understanding of responsibility he had never truly grasped before. Evan Ortiz stood beside him, calm and composed as always. Yet beneath his composed exterior, he felt the weight of leadership differently now. He had watched Jason falter, witnessed his mistakes, and seen the beginnings of transformation. Leadership, he realized, was as much about guiding others through failure as it was about making flawless decisions. Admiral Rebecca Monroe appeared on the parade ground as quietly as she always did, yet her presence commanded immediate attention. The medals on her chest glinted faintly in the morning sun, a reminder of decades of experience, courage, and lives saved in real-world operations. But it was not the decorations that inspired awe, it was the calm, unwavering authority she exuded, the weight of someone who had faced chaos and emerged unbroken. "Cadets," she began, her voice calm, deliberate, and cutting through the morning air, "today marks the final phase of your evaluation. This exercise will challenge not only your tactical skills, but also your character, your ability to take responsibility, and your capacity to reconcile with past mistakes. Leadership is not earned by words alone. It is earned through actions, accountability, and courage." The cadets formed their teams once more, each group carrying the collective memory of previous failures, triumphs, and lessons. Jason's team approached the exercise with a renewed sense of focus. This time, there was no arrogance, no impulsive demands for authority. Instead, there was collaboration, communication, and a conscious effort to value every voice. The scenario began: simulated emergencies, multiple casualties, and unexpected obstacles designed to test the cadets' ability to respond under pressure. The wind picked up, whipping rain across the field and making footing treacherous. The stakes were high. The chaos of the simulation mirrored reality more closely than ever before. Jason's team faced their first challenge immediately. A group of role players, simulating civilians, called for help from opposite ends of the field. Supplies were limited, and the terrain was muddy and slippery. In previous exercises, Jason would have barked orders without listening, risking both time and effectiveness. Today he paused, looked at his team, and assessed the situation. "Ortiz, I need your advice," Jason said quietly, meeting Evan's eyes. "Where should we prioritize?" Evan considered the options, then nodded. "Start with the injured nearest to the waterline. I'll coordinate supplies to the north. Work with your team to cover both sectors efficiently." Jason listened, delegated tasks thoughtfully, and ensured that every cadet was aware of their role. When one teammate stumbled in the mud, Jason immediately extended a hand and helped them regain balance. There was no pride in the act, only a recognition that leadership meant protecting and supporting those under his command. Meanwhile, Admiral Monroe observed from the sidelines. She made no corrections, issued no overt instructions, and yet her presence weighed heavily on the cadets. Every decision, every pause, every act of collaboration was catalogued meticulously. She noted Jason's transformation, the subtle shift from impulsive, ego-driven commands to deliberate, accountable leadership. She saw Evan's calm guidance reinforcing the team's efficiency and morale. The exercise escalated further. Simulated casualties multiplied, communication lines were partially cut, and the limited supplies forced difficult choices. Panic could have set in, but Jason's team moved with cohesion. Mistakes were minimal, quickly corrected, and met with constructive solutions rather than blame. Jason, now fully aware of the consequences of arrogance, acted decisively while remaining receptive to input from his team. Halfway through the exercise, a particularly challenging scenario emerged. A role player portraying a civilian had fallen into a deep puddle, unable to climb out without assistance. Jason spotted the situation immediately. Without hesitation, he coordinated a rescue, assigning cadets to secure ropes and assist safely. As they worked, he maintained calm instructions, checked on his team, and ensured the casualty was stabilized before moving on. Admiral Monroe watched quietly, her eyes softening slightly. For the first time, she allowed herself a hint of acknowledgement in her gaze. Jason's growth was clear. He had faced the consequences of previous arrogance, learned from them, and transformed his behavior into effective leadership. But she also knew that true leadership required ongoing reflection, humility, and resilience, lessons that would continue beyond today. At the conclusion of the exercise, the cadets regrouped on the parade ground, exhausted, muddy, and soaked to bone. Silence fell as Admiral Monroe approached Jason and Evan, her gaze sweeping over the team. "Jason McCall," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying undeniable weight. "You have shown that leadership can be learned, even when initially ignored. You listened. You acted responsibly. You protected those under your command. That is true growth." Jason's chest tightened. "Ma'am, I want to apologize," he said, voice trembling slightly. "For yesterday, for disrespecting you. I didn't know who you were, and I treated you poorly. I understand now." Admiral Monroe studied him silently for a moment, then nodded. "Apology is only meaningful when it is followed by action. Your actions today show that you are beginning to understand. Respect is earned through consistency, not words. You are on the right path." Evan stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Jason's shoulder. "You did well, Jason. You kept your team together, and you didn't let pride get in the way. That's what matters." Jason nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he felt that respect, humility, and responsibility were not abstract lessons. They were lived, tangible, and essential to survival and leadership. The remaining cadets, having observed Jason's growth and the guidance of Admiral Monroe, also began to reflect on their own behavior. Whispers of acknowledgement and respect passed quietly among them. The once mocking cadets who had spat at Admiral Monroe now recognized her authority, not just as a high-ranking officer, but as a living testament to courage, discipline, and earned respect. Later, as the cadets cleaned up the parade grounds, Jason approached Admiral Monroe once more. "Ma'am, thank you. Not just for today, but for showing me what leadership truly means." She looked at him, her expression unreadable, but softened by the faintest hint of a smile. "Leadership is not given, Jason. It is earned through responsibility, humility, and courage. Today, you have taken a step toward earning it. Continue walking that path." The storm had passed, leaving behind muddy grounds, exhausted cadets, and a sense of quiet triumph. Jason, Evan, and the rest of the team walked back to the barracks, changed not just by the exercises, but by the realization that true leadership required listening, humility, and courage. Somewhere on the empty parade grounds, Admiral Monroe watched the sun break through the clouds. She whispered softly to herself, a mixture of reflection and quiet pride. They are learning. Not yet perfect, but they will grow. They will lead. For Jason McCall, the journey from arrogance to humility had been grueling but transformative. He had faced the consequences of disrespect, witnessed the cost of impulsive decisions, and learned that leadership was not about being seen as strong, but about being responsible, aware, and accountable. The lessons of Admiral Monroe were indelible etched into his character, shaping the officer he would one day become. The morning sun rose over Annapolis with a golden clarity, illuminating the parade grounds where the cadets had spent the last week in relentless training. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth from the previous day's storm. Today marked the culmination of the exercises that had tested every ounce of their endurance, patience, and leadership skills. The young officers in training knew that today would determine not only their grades, but their understanding of what it truly meant to lead. Jason McCall adjusted his uniform, now clean and crisp for the first time in days. His boots still bore traces of mud from the storm, a quiet reminder of past failures. He had changed over the course of the week, each exercise eroding arrogance and replacing it with awareness, humility, and a growing sense of responsibility. He glanced at Evan Ortiz, who stood silently beside him, calm, composed, and fully prepared. Together, they represented a team transformed, a stark contrast to the chaotic, pride-driven pair of just days ago. Admiral Rebecca Monroe appeared on the field as quietly and commandingly as ever. Her presence drew immediate attention, her medals glinting in the morning light. There were no theatrical gestures, no dramatic speeches, just a calm, unwavering authority that demanded focus and respect. Her eyes swept over the assembled cadets, lingering on each one as though measuring not just skill, but character. "Cadets," she began, her voice carrying evenly across the field. "Today concludes Operation Sea Mirror. This exercise has tested your leadership under extreme conditions, limited resources, high pressure, and chaos. You have faced adversity, made mistakes, and been forced to confront the consequences of your actions. Today, you will demonstrate what you have learned." The cadets were divided into their teams for the final exercise, a scenario designed to replicate a large-scale emergency at sea, multiple simulated casualties, failing communications, and limited supplies. The exercise was intentionally overwhelming, designed to test not only tactical skills, but also the maturity, empathy, and judgment of each cadet. Jason's team approached the task with determination. Gone was the impulsive, arrogant attitude that had characterized their first exercises. Jason paused, listened to his team, and assessed the situation. He delegated tasks according to individual strengths, ensured that every cadet had a voice, and maintained a calm, authoritative presence without dominating. "Ortiz," he said quietly, "coordinate medical teams to the east sector. I'll handle evacuation from the west. Communicate with the others, and keep everyone informed. Let's work together." Evan nodded, impressed by Jason's measured approach. "Understood. Keep the lines clear and focus on the priorities first. We've got this." The simulation began in earnest. Rain from an earlier drizzle made the terrain slippery, adding to the difficulty. Role players portraying injured civilians called for assistance, some fainting, others shouting for help. Jason's team moved efficiently, working together seamlessly. Mistakes were minimal, quickly corrected, and met with calm solutions rather than panic or blame. Admiral Monroe watched silently from the sidelines, her eyes sharp, cataloging every decision and every subtle display of leadership. She noted Jason's transformation, his careful delegation, his ability to listen, and his willingness to accept guidance from Evan and others. She observed Evan's continued composure, quietly reinforcing the team's efforts and ensuring cohesion under pressure. As the exercise progressed, a particularly challenging scenario arose. A simulated flood, generated by instructors, cut off access to critical supplies. Some cadets began to panic, their coordination faltering under the stress. Jason stepped forward, taking decisive action. Team, focus. Secure the casualties first. We'll reroute supplies through the north sector. Follow instructions and support each other. No one gets left behind. The cadets responded immediately, moving as a cohesive unit. Jason worked alongside them, lifting fallen teammates, assisting injured role players, and maintaining communication with all sections of the team. Evan coordinated supplies and triage, reinforcing the decisions Jason made and ensuring that efficiency was maintained under pressure. The simulation concluded with the successful rescue of all role players and the completion of objectives. Exhausted, soaked, and muddy, the cadets regrouped on the parade ground. Silence fell, a mixture of exhaustion and reflection settling over the team. Admiral Monroe approached Jason and Evan, her gaze sweeping over the entire team. "Today," she said, her voice calm yet carrying undeniable weight, "you have demonstrated the qualities of true leadership. Jason McCall, you have shown that arrogance can be replaced with humility, that mistakes can become lessons, and that leadership is earned through responsibility and action, not titles or pride." Jason swallowed, his chest tight. "Ma'am, I've learned more than I ever imagined. Thank you for showing me what leadership truly means." Monroe's gaze softened slightly. "Respect is not given, Jason. It is earned. Today, you have earned it. But remember, leadership is a lifelong journey. Complacency or arrogance will undo progress faster than failure itself." Evan stepped forward. "You've taught us that leadership is about listening, acting responsibly, and protecting those under our command. We'll carry that forward." Admiral Monroe's eyes scanned the rest of the cadets, who now looked at her with genuine respect rather than fear or skepticism. Those who had once mocked her, those who had disrespected her rank and achievements, now understood that authority was earned through courage, wisdom, and the selfless willingness to take responsibility. Jason turned to Evan, exhaustion and pride mingling on his face. "We did it. We actually did it." Evan nodded quietly, his usual calm demeanor tinged with satisfaction. "We learned. That's what matters." The cadets filed back to the barracks, muddy, soaked, and fatigued, but transformed. They had been tested, humbled, and ultimately strengthened. Jason, once arrogant and reckless, had embraced humility and responsibility. Evan had seen his teammate grow, proving that leadership could indeed be nurtured even in the face of stubborn pride. Later, as the cadets cleaned and organized their gear, Admiral Monroe stood on the parade grounds, watching silently. She reflected on the week's events, the chaos and mistakes, the growth and redemption. The lessons had been hard, the methods rigorous, but the results were undeniable. She whispered softly to herself, almost as a meditation, "They have learned. Not all are perfect, not all are ready, but the seeds of true leadership have been planted. They will grow." Jason approached her quietly, still dripping with rainwater from the previous exercise. "Ma'am, thank you. For everything, I understand now. Respect, responsibility, leadership. It's more than a title." Admiral Monroe regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "Keep walking that path, Jason. Leadership is a journey without end. Today, you have taken an important step." As the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the parade grounds in warm light, the cadets looked around at each other, at the mud, the mess, and the signs of struggle and triumph. They had faced the consequences of arrogance, endured the trials of responsibility, and emerged not just as better cadets, but as young leaders who understood the gravity and nobility of command. Jason glanced at Evan, smiling faintly for the first time in days. "We'll do better next time, together." Evan nodded, equally reflective. "We've earned it, and we'll keep earning it." Admiral Monroe watched them from the sidelines, satisfied yet vigilant. The cadets had been tested, broken, and rebuilt. Pride had been tempered, mistakes had become lessons, and the seeds of lasting leadership had taken root. As they left the parade grounds that day, she knew that the lessons they had learned, humility, responsibility, courage, and respect, would stay with them for the rest of their careers. And perhaps one day they would lead others with the same quiet, unwavering authority she had demonstrated all along. For Jason McCall, the journey from arrogance to humility was complete. The woman he had once mocked, spat near, and underestimated had taught him the ultimate lesson. True leadership is earned through action, responsibility, and respect, not through fear, pride, or titles. And with that understanding, he, along with his fellow cadets, was ready to step into the future as officers capable of leading with honor, wisdom, and courage.